Inshallah, there's been a slight change to the schedule, and definitely, I would like to thank everybody for their patience. As far as your attention is concerned, naturally, the speakers have a lot of information to deliver, and they are on a short timeline. So it may be a lot of information in a very short span of time. But once again, Jazakumullahu khairan for your undivided attention. Just as a side note, the tea is coming from what I understand, and now, or it will be coming now, inshallah. Nonetheless, we want to kind of make sure that we can fit in all of our topics in an efficient manner, and it is for this reason I would like to call upon one of my teachers who taught us many books of fiqh and ahadith, particularly Ibn Majah rahimahullah Sunan. Without further ado, I'd like to call upon Sheikh Asim, who was a senior lecturer at Darul Ulum al-Madaniyah, who will be addressing the topic as to how the Nabi Sallallahu, Alaihay Wasallam was with his wives.
الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على بعض صدق الله العظيم. I think one of the things that people may be expecting from this talk is that I'm going to start narrating some of the incidents in the life of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. But I think I want to first point out the actual purpose behind this talk and why I chose the subject. MashaAllah, we've heard a lot of different bayans in which the scholars talk about different incidents, and alhamdulillah, we've learned a lot from them. But it's important to extract. So I can narrate all these different incidents from the life of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and how he treated his wives. But what are some of the things that we learn from the incidents that we're hearing about Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? What are we learning from how Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam treated his wives? And the first thing that came to my mind, considering our situation nowadays, and I was just asking a brother yesterday, who was I think just recently married, and I asked him, so how's the wife? And he said, well, I'm divorced. I said, well, you just got married. And so this is a common thing that's happening amongst our youth, is that divorces are increasing. And if we look at the life of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and how he treated his wives, we learn a couple of things. If we apply those things in our life, in our relationships with our wives, then there is a guarantee from Allah and His Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that this relationship will be forever, inshallah, not only in the dunya but also in the akhirah. Not only in the dunya but also in the akhirah. One of those things is that once a Sahabi came to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and he asked Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam a very important question. He said, "Ma u'tiya ma khairul abd." What is the best thing that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala can give to a person? What is the best thing that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala can give to a person? The best thing, a great thing that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala can give. So he said, "Husnul khuluq." Good character. And when we look at the relationship between the husband and the wife nowadays, we realize the importance of what Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's response to the question. That what is the greatest thing that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala can give to a servant? Husnul khuluq. Nowadays, the husband is running to a mufti, and the wife is also running to a mufti. And they both will ask a question, and the mufti will give the correct response in both situations. She will go to her mufti, he goes to his mufti, and the mufti gives the response, and it's according to the sharia. He's right on this side, and he's right on that side as well. But the relationship is still breaking. Which tells us that relationships are not based on the laws of sharia. If a person wants to make his relationship strong with his wife, and wants to make his family a stronger a stronger family, then he needs to establish husn khuluq in his life. In that case, the laws of the courts in the US, the laws of the Sharia will not suffice. What is required of me? What is the basic requirement of the Sharia? What is the basic requirement that I have to fulfill in order for my wife's rights to be fulfilled? And she's asking the same question about him. If they only do just that much, the family will go down. The relationship will definitely break. But if they both have husn khuluq, good character, then inshallah the relationship will always become stronger. So one of the essential things that we learn from these incidents, from the narrations about the life of Rasulullah ﷺ in his relationship with his wives, was that he always had good character. He was not looking at what are the basic requirements that I have to fulfill that is required from me from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for my wife. And neither were the wives of Rasulullah ﷺ thinking, okay, what are the basic hukuk of my husband that I have to fulfill that I don't have to do anything beyond that? Nowadays, the relationship is of that kind. And because of that, lack of husn khuluq, lack of good character, the family relations are breaking. And within months, within days. So what we're looking to establish, if we want to make our families, our relationship with our wives, our relationship with our husbands stronger, is that we have husn khuluq. Number one. Number two, there's a common way of thinking, or you could say a mentality nowadays, is that people tend to think that the more I will love my wife, the more that I love my wife, the less my relationship will be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where it's actually the opposite. The more a person loves his wife, and the more he does for his wife, the better the relationship will be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, that if a person is being good to his wife, he's essentially building his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If he's loving his wife more and doing things that increase love between him and her, then he's automatically increasing love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was a student of one of the famous shuyukh from the past, Shaykh Ashfali Thanwi, who was called Hakim al-Ummah in his time. And one of his students asked him that, I do my dhikr and I do all the ibadat and do all the things that are required of me, but I sometimes think about my wife when I'm doing my dhikr. And sometimes I want to spend some time with her. And he's asking the question in a way as if to show that I should be spending that time with my wife, I should be spending it doing the dhikr of Allah. I should be spending that time praying nawafil. I should be spending that time in the masjid. So Shaykh Thanwi mentioned a usul, an asal, a rule. And that rule was that no, the more time you spend with your wife, the more love is created between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is also, in a way, a form of dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. SubhanAllah, we never even thought of it that way. That the more time we spend with our wives, talking to them, spending time with them, and just having a conversation. It's one of the sunnahs of Rasulullah ﷺ. After Isha, he would talk with his wives. Whoever's day it was, after Isha, he would come and he would have a talk with them for a little while. This was his sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ. Spending a little bit of time talking. This does not take us away from the remembrance of Allah. It takes us closer to the remembrance of Allah. And another way, what that means is that it increases our taqwa. It's increasing our taqwa. So two things. Number one, husn khuluq. And number two, that the more time we spend with our wife, the more love we give to her, the more our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is increasing. One thing Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha said about Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and this is amazing, I was thinking about this when I was reading this narration. She said, كَانَ يَذْكُرُ اللَّهُ فِي كُلِّ أَحْيَانِ. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam used to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. On every occasion, at every single moment of his life, he was remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then I saw another narration telling me something completely different. And that was that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam loved Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha so much that Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, مَا غِرْتُ عَلَىٰ إِمْرَأَةٍ لِلنَّبِيِّ مَا غِرْتُ عَلَىٰ خَدِيجَةٍ. That I never was so possessive about any single wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as much as I was about Khadija radiallahu anha. Why? لِمَا كُنْتُ أَسْمَعَ. Because I used to hear him all the time. He used to always talk about her. He used to always talk about Khadija radiallahu anha. What would he used to say? She did this, and she was like this, and she was like this. And not only that, he went beyond that. Whenever he used to slaughter an animal or some food would come, he would make sure he sent some of that food to her friends. Remember, he's sending that food not to her family members. Family members, besides that, he's sending food to the friends of Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. That's how much love he had for Khadija radiallahu anha, and he's still remembering her years and years and years after her death. This is also the zikr of Allah. And it tells us another thing. And that is that we should cherish, if we have a good wife who helps us in our deen, we should cherish her. Because Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha helped Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam at a time when he needed a person support the most. That's why the year in which she passed away was called Amul Huzn, the year of Gham, the year of grief. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam lost his own limb. And from that point on, he always used to remember Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha. There's an incident mentioned in the Battle of Badr. One of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam's son-in-laws, Abu al-As ibn Rabi'a, who later became a Sahabi, at that time he was a Kafir, and he was fighting on behalf of the Kuffar with Abu Jahl against Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He was captured. The Sahaba and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam decided that they're not going to allow the prisoners to go free unless they give something in return as a ransom. Give some money and then free the prisoners. So everybody gave whatever they had. They sent forth their family, the prisoners sent forth people to Quraysh to go tell them, give them this and this and this. And so the money would come and then the prisoner would go free back to Makkah. So Abu al-As ibn Rabi'a radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he was captured. Now he needed to free himself. So in order to free him, his wife, who is the daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha, she sends a necklace. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is sitting with the Sahaba ridwanullahi majma'in, and this necklace is brought, and the Sahabi says to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that this is for the freedom of Abu al-As ibn Rabi'a, your son-in-law. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam looks at it, وَرَقَّ لَهَا رَقَّةً شَدِيدًا. His grief was so much for Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha that it appeared on his body. He started crying and shuddering. He's remembering her because she was the one who owned that necklace and given it to Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha. So he begs the Sahaba, he asked the Sahaba ridwanullahi majma'in, if you please give this necklace back to Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha, if you allow, and I just free Abu al-As ibn Rabi'a for free. Of course, Sahaba ridwanullahi majma'in, why wouldn't they not? He said, no, Ya Rasulullah, for sure, go. Free him. We don't want anything from him. So he returned that necklace to Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha, and the only promise he made with Abu al-As ibn Rabi'a is that when you go back, make sure you send my daughter. And then he sent two people to Makkah al-Mukarramah to bring his daughter, Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha, back. But the point that I'm making is that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, his grief for his wife was so much. He was remembering her. This was كَانَ يَذْكُرُ اللَّهَ فِي كُلِّ أَحْيَانِ too. This was also included in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now I don't want to say about us, but now if the wife passes away, we say, Alhamdulillah, now we can have another one. She never allowed me to do a second one in her life. Right? But the idea is to show that the relationship that Rasulullah ﷺ had with his wives was so deep and so profound that he would not want to forget them even after they passed away. And that's something that we need to reflect upon ourselves. That do we have that type of relationship with our wives? Think about it. Do we have that type of relationship with our wives? That if she was to pass away, that we would cry and we would remember her? We realize the type of relationship that Rasulullah ﷺ had with his wife. It was deep. And his good character, we tend to think that he was a Nabi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the greatest of all creation. And we know the higher a position a person holds in this dunya, it's very hard to be normal in front of that person. There's a person like your father. You have a lot of respect for your father. So you behave with him in a certain way. There's certain things you make sure you do, and certain things you make sure you don't do. And you behave with him in a certain way, act with him in a certain way, say certain things, don't say certain things. You can't be with him like you are with your own friends. No matter how free your father is with you. That's a simple example. Then we can take bigger examples of people who are beyond that, who we have a lot of respect for. Shuyukh who we have respect for. How do we behave in front of them when they are in front of us? Or even from the worldly perspective, there's a person who we have a lot of respect for because he's very wealthy, he's very rich, people respect him. We behave with him in a certain way, we don't want him to think bad of us. The way Rasulullah ﷺ was with his wives, they never even got the feeling. In fact, they used to forget that he's a Nabi of Allah. His akhlaq were so beautiful with the azwaj mutahharat that sometimes Aisha radiallahu ta'ala says that when the adhan was called and Rasulullah ﷺ would get up and go, then we realize that now there's a Nabi of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls and his face changes. Allah is calling me. But before that, it's hard for us to realize and keep in mind all the time, my husband is a Nabi of Allah, because his akhlaq were so beautiful. And he treated him in such a way that they could not get that feeling in their hearts, because if they felt like that all the time, then how would they be able to deal with him as a husband? If you're going to be living such a tense life with a husband and your whole life like that, it's very hard. But the type of akhlaq that Rasulullah ﷺ had, that they completely forgot. Beyond that sometimes they would behave with Rasulullah ﷺ in such a way that we wouldn't act. Sometimes they would raise their voices in front of Rasulullah ﷺ. Now, I'm sure sometimes we may think about the azwaj mutahharat, that he was a Nabi of Allah, they shouldn't be disrespectful. But the type of relationship that is between a husband and wife, we know that Umar ibn Khattab was the same type of person. If he saw anybody saying or disrespecting Rasulullah ﷺ in a way, he's ready to go at him. But he had an understanding that when it comes to the azwaj mutahharat, even he has to be careful. They can say a lot of things that normal people can't say, because they are the wives of Rasulullah ﷺ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this relationship between a husband and wife as such. So once Aisha radiallahu ta'ala, once Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu is passing by the house of Rasulullah ﷺ, and he hears the voice of his daughter raised above the voice of Rasulullah ﷺ. She's talking loud. So he gets angry. He comes in to slap her. He comes in and he's getting ready to slap her. And Rasulullah ﷺ stops. No. So everything's okay. Don't worry. So obviously Rasulullah ﷺ has told him he leaves. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, you see how I saved you from him? Now Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, look at his relationship with his wives. How he joked with his wives. That she's raising his voice, or she's raising her voice in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He could have allowed Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu to tell her that, remember who I am. I'm a Nabi of Allah. He stops him, and on top of that he tells her, see, look who I am. I stopped you. I stopped you from getting in trouble. Otherwise he would have slapped you. And we see incidents like this happening all the time. Of his husn khuluq, his good character with the azwaj mutahharat. Once he's on one of the journeys, and Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he tells the people, taqaddamu, taqaddamu, go. Now what is in the hearts of the Sahaba? They're thinking, oh, maybe the husband and wife have to talk about some important issues. Something's happened. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says to Aisha radiallahu anha, ta'ali hatta usabiqak. Come on, let's have a race. Come on, let's have a race. Let's have some fun. Let's see who wins. There's an important thing about this incident, inshallah, I'll mention at the end. She says, Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha is narrating this incident. And she says that I raced with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and at that time my weight was very less, I was very thin, I was newly married, and I beat Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the race. Fasakata, he stayed quiet. She must have told him, see, I won, you lost. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam didn't say anything. Fanasaytu, she said, I forgot about the incident. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam didn't forget. Kana yadhkurullah fi kulli ahyani. He used to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. Remember that. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam didn't forget this incident. When, a couple of months later, a couple of years later, it's not mentioned, they went on our journey again. Aisha radiallahu anha with Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. He said the same words again. Ta'ali, let's go. And he sent all the Sahaba, go forward. So then he has a race with his wife, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala. She says, this time I had a lot more weight, so I lost. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Hadihi bitilka, this is in return for that. So فَضَحِكَ هَذِهِ بِتِلْكَ. He started laughing and he said, هَذِهِ بِتِلْكَ. This is in return for that. But he was not one who forgot Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at any moment in his life. But the fact that he remembered this incident and next time they went on a journey tells us, and that he remembered the incident is a sign that this is all included in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Being good with our wives, having good character towards our wives especially. There was one sheikh, he was a very good speaker and very good writer, very good in many different ways, and it was well known. He once went to his teacher, and his teacher said to him that, you know what, your speeches, your articles, your books, whatever you do for which you have gained so much fame means nothing to me. I will know you when your wife tells me that she's happy with you. So if you asked the Azwaj al-Mutahharat, Ridwanullah alayhim ajma'in, what they thought of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu ta'ala anha says about Rasulullah, Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu ta'ala anha says about Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, when the women saw him, they cut their hands, but if they saw Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, they would have cut their hearts out. That's why Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha and all those wajibat were very protective about Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They didn't want anybody coming in the way between them and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And there's only one person that can come in between the way between Aisha radiallahu anha and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and that was another wife. Who else is going to come in the way? So that's why they used to sometimes have matches, right? But they did it all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their love for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in itself was a form of dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Their khidmah, their service to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and everything that happened between them, that was also for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why Habiba radiallahu ta'ala anha, when she was passing away, she was one of the Azwaj al-Taharat. She specifically asked forgiveness from all the other wives, the co-wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And when people, the munafiqeen, accused Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha of wrongdoing, na'udhu billah, when people went to Zaynab radiallahu ta'ala anha, when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam went to Zaynab radiallahu ta'ala anha and asked her, what do you think about Aisha? She had nothing bad to say, only good. Even though she was the biggest rival of Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu ta'ala anha amongst the wives. Now, even in that situation where there are so many wives, it's very hard to be equal with all of them, especially when they're fighting over you. There's an incident mentioned in Ibn Majah that when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam got married to, I believe it was Hazrat Safiya radiallahu ta'ala anha, in the battle of Khaybar, and he was returning, and of course all the people of Medina know now that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has just gotten married to Safiya radiallahu ta'ala anha. So Aisha radiallahu anha is burning inside. She wants to see, oh yeah, let's see who this woman is, who's coming up against me. So woman came to her and told her, she's really pretty. She's very good. She's like this, and she's like this, she's like this. And Aisha radiallahu anha is saying, yeah, I'll see now. So she puts on her niqab, and she rushes out to go see Safiya radiallahu anha. Who is she? Let me see who she is. All this praise that I'm hearing about her. And what happens is, on the way back, she sees Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam sees her. And through the niqab, he looks at her eyes and he can recognize it's Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha. And he looks at her and he knows she's angry. So he runs towards her. He runs towards her and he catches her and holds her and says, so Aisha, what do you think? What do you think? She said, leave me alone. I said, leave me alone. Yahudiya wasta Yahudiyat. She's just another one of the Yahudi women. No good. Did Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam respond? Now look at ourselves in that situation when our wives sometimes say something or we have some type of altercation with them, some type of argument with them, and they say something harsh and which is not right. How do we respond in that situation? We tell them, you were wrong because I did this and I know. You know she's saying wrong. So you get there and start an argument with her and your situation becomes worse. It's better to stay quiet. That's a part of husn khuluq. She'll love you more at the end of it. She really will. You argue more and her heart will get darker about you. And remember, she cooks the food. You're going to have a hard time later on. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned that what is this? That you hit your woman in the day and that at night you go to her? No, treat your woman with goodness because it's all going to come back on you. If you treat your wife good, with husn khuluq, with good character, then your life and home will be better. You don't treat her well, you're going to have a hard time. So this is for your own good sake. It's a benefit in the akhirah, and it's a benefit in the dunya. Love your wife, treat her well, and she will give it back to you. Usually the way it is that the expectation comes first, that is she doing these things, then I will do this. And if she doesn't do those things, then I'm not going to do them either. Once, Zaynab radiallahu ta'ala anha is really angry over some incident. She comes to Rasulullah, Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu ta'ala anha's house. She sits inside and she starts talking. And she's saying to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, she says, you know this Buniyat Abi Bakr, this little daughter of Abu Bakr Siddiq? I've seen her. She just has to move her hands and you just do whatever she says. Meaning to say that you're under her finger. She's in complete control over you. And truly, the good husband is one who's controlled by his wife. Somebody said, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. Men, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us management over the woman. We have control over the woman. But when we look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we realize that the tafsir that we understand, and those people who make objections against Islam, the understanding that they get from this ayah is completely wrong. Because when you look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his akhlaq were the Quran. His character was the Quran. Aisha Siddiqa radhiyallahu anha says, "Kana khulqu al-Quran." His akhlaq was the Quran. So when you look at the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and how he was with his wife, that is the tafsir of الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. That is the perfect tafsir. So if somebody asks you, oh, you're in your faith, there's a verse that says that, the men are in control. You say, wait a second here. Have you ever read the seerah, the biography of our blessed Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and how he was with his wives? So before you have an objection, look into the seerah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, then you will know the true tafsir of this ayah. Remember, every ayah, the best tafsir of it is in the sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It needs a practical application. One is reading in the books and understanding the translation and the definition and going into tafsir. That's one understanding. And one is seeing a practical application of it. That is the best tafsir. So when we look at the sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that is a practical application of all the ayahs of the Quran Hakim. And in that way we realize that the sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is the greatest tafsir of the Quran Hakim. When somebody is following a sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he's actually fulfilling a tafsir of the Quran Hakim. He is putting the Quran into his life. SubhanAllah. So if a person is good to his wife, and he has husn khuluq with his wife, we realize that it's not small. He is fulfilling, he is following and adhering to the Quran Hakim and the laws of Quran Hakim. Why? Because this is what Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the way he taught us. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's way is the way of the Quran Hakim. As I was saying, Zainab radiallahu ta'ala anha said to Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that this small daughter of Abu Bakr Siddiq, she just turns her hands and does these things, and you just fall under her command and do whatever she says. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam kept on listening and listening. Aisha Siddiqa is completely quiet throughout the whole time. She doesn't say anything. Then Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, "Dunaki fantasiri." Okay, now your turn. Talk. So she says, I talked to her and I started responding to all her objections and started talking back until the saliva in her mouth went dry. Meaning she had nothing to say. I shut her up. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam got happy. يَتَحَلَّلُ وَجْهُهُ. You could see that he was happy when we looked at his face. You see? Like Abu Bakr Siddiq, like daughter. Right? Just like the father is, the daughter the same way. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is seeing the two eyes are fighting, and all this is happening in front of him. But what is Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam doing? She's speaking about Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and telling him, you're like this, and you're like this, and you're like this. And he's completely quiet. Doesn't say anything. This is husn khuluq. Though Aisha Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam loved of all the wives amongst those who are alive, Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu ta'ala had the most. He was always scared in his heart that because of that love that I have for Aisha Siddiqa, that's more than love for all the other wives, that I don't do injustice toward the others. So he used to recite a dua that he used to make to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, Allahumma hadha qasmi fima amlik. this is what you have told me to do, to be equal to my wife, I do as much as I can. فَلَا تَلُمْنِي فِي مَا تَمْلِكُ وَلَا أَمْلِكُ. Do not catch me for that which you are in control over and I don't have any control over, meaning the heart. I don't have control over who I love more and who I love less. That's something that's in your control. But it's my responsibility to fulfill the rules of the Sharia, and that is to be good with my wife. What that shows us is that we should not allow emotions to come in the way between ourselves and our wives. Sometimes we get angry. We should control it because it's against the Sharia. Sometimes we have a lot of love for a wife, but we want to do something that's against the Sharia because of it. We have to control that emotion. Sometimes we may feel a certain different type of emotion, and it wants us to do something wrong. We have to control it. So the emotion, we'll have different emotions throughout our life, not only in relation to how we treat our wives, but in all incidents. That's the test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we will always have different emotions in different situations, but we are required to follow the Sharia. Are we following the Sharia when it comes to how we treat our wives? But she said this to me. No, brother, don't let your emotion take control over you. This is what Rasulullah is teaching us in the dua. I'm doing what is my responsibility. As far as my emotions are concerned, Ya Allah, I will not allow them to take control over me and dictate how I will deal with my wife, but I can't control the action itself of the heart. The anger will come, the love will come. That's in your hands, Ya Allah. See, everything that Rasulullah said, including his du'as, teaches us beautiful things. So we learn from this dua of Rasulullah that we need to learn to control our emotions. Many times in our lives we will face incidents with our wives where we're not getting angry. And we know that she is wrong. We remember Rasulullah's life and how he dealt with his wives. And that's why Rasulullah said, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِي. The best of you is the best to his wife. وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِي. And I'm the best of you to my wife. We want to know a person, know about how he treats his wife. Everybody's good to everybody else outside. But you really want to know what a person is like, then you want to go to the wife and ask her, how does he treat you? Because that's where the emotions come out. You're facing a situation. I mean, it's not like the relationship with a mother. The relationship with the mother and the son is such that it's a blood relation. You can never leave the mother. You can never leave the mother, no matter how much you try. That's a relationship created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the wife is a different situation. You give her talaq, she's done. People abuse that law of the Sharia that gives us that permission. It isn't giving us that permission that we abuse it, but to test us that are we in control of our emotions? Are we in control of our emotions when it comes to our wives? Or as soon as she does something wrong, for this many years you've been doing this, that's it, I can't take it anymore. Now I'm giving you talaq. This is a test for men that we have been given that right. Not that we abuse it. That's why it's abghadul mubahat, the worst of all things that are permissible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like it. Only in extreme circumstances is it allowed. And I remember one of the shaykh mentioned it's like that of an emergency exit. People going to the masjid, they go from the normal door that everybody else goes from. Imagine a person coming from the emergency exit. But let's say the administration will say, brother, this is the emergency exit. He said, but it's a door. And you can go to the masjid. The whole point is to do ibadah. I'm doing ibadah. What difference does it make if it comes from this door or that door? No, that's not right. You come from the same door everybody else comes from. Same way here. That's the last resort. The first thing we need to do is, are we controlling our emotions? Are we controlling ourselves when we come to our wife? If we're not, then it's not a matter of thought. It's a matter of getting good character. That will help the relationship get better. The talaq won't do anything. It will make the situation even worse. So the problem is not being solved, it's being made worse. If you want to solve that situation, do husn khuluq. And we see many examples in the life of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I give a few, very few examples, but it shows us that Rasulullah, that the essence of his relationship with his wife was husn khuluq, control over emotions, and also that loving the wives and talking with the wives and taking them out and being good to them. Just being good to them. You don't have money to take them out, but you can be good to them all the time. Small thing happens and you just get angry. No. You be good to them and you go out of your way to treat them good. Because they'll all come back to you. There's one sheikh who was very famous for his karamat. And his wife was known to be very rebellious towards him. So once he was flying in the sky or something of that sort, and when he came back home, she said to him, I saw a person. What are you, a waliullah? I saw a bigger waliullah. He was flying in the sky. He said, that was me. She said, oh, that's why you were crooked. But he used to say to his students, that if I have gained husn khuluq and purification of the heart, I have gained it through my wife. I have gained the purification of my heart through my wife. Because she's a means for me to do the dhikr of Allah. That when I get angry, I control myself, and I do it for the sake of Allah. That's a form of dhikr of Allah. Subhanallah. And that builds the relationship. It makes it very strong. And that's why we see that the Azwaj al-Mutahharat radiyallahu ta'ala anhunna, how much they loved Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. They could not stand anything against Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. When Ali radiyallahu ta'ala was asked by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam at the time when she was accused of wrongdoing, so Ali radiyallahu ta'ala said, Ya Rasulullah, there's many wives that you can take. You don't have to worry about this. Because he saw the tension that Rasulullah was going through, and the hardship and the grief. So he said to Rasulullah, Ya Rasulullah, don't worry, there's other wives too. You can get married to somebody else. Aisha radiallahu remembered that for the rest of her life. How dare you say that? That you can take another wife. Men think very different from women. You say, okay, let's get married again. Women say, oh, who told you that? Who told you that? I'm never going to let you go to that sheikh and bayan again. Right? He's destroying our relationship. So we learn, inshallah, and this is the essence of what I'm talking about, is husn khuluq, good character towards our wives. And this is what was the essence of the relationship between Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his wives. I remember one more incident, and I'll just mention that very briefly. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in the house of one of his wives, and he was sitting down with the Sahaba ridwanullahi ajma'in, and they were about to eat. So one of the other wives from one of the other houses, she sent some food for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The wife in whose house Rasulullah and the Sahaba ridwanullahi ajma'in were at got very angry. She got very angry. How dare my co-wife try to take control over Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and, come into my domain. Sending food in my day. No way. So she sent her servant, go when the food is brought forth, and she puts her hand forward, make sure you knock her hand down so the food falls. So as soon as she brought the food forward, the woman, the slave, the servant of the wife, she hit the hand and the food fell down. Rasulullah understood right away what had happened. Now, there's two things that happened. The Sahaba are sitting there. They're sitting there. But Rasulullah never asked them to pick up the food. He picked up the food himself. He picked up the food that was dropped by his wife himself and was putting it back in the plate. SubhanAllah. This is husn khuluq. And then he said, he's excusing his wife in front of the Sahaba. He says, Gharat ummukum. Your mother became overprotective. See the two things? He's protecting his wife in front of the Sahaba. No, she just got a little overprotective. And he's also picking up the food himself. He's not telling the Sahaba to pick it up. How much love Rasulullah had for his wives. And this is what we want to think of when we think of our relationship with our wives. That do we have that type of relationship? That we have control over our emotions? And that if something was to happen to our wife, would we go out of our way for her? I'm sure the woman, mashallah, in the back are really enjoying this part. Yeah? But it's true. It is true. It is absolutely true. This is the haqiqah, the reality of how we are supposed to treat our wives. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the ability to follow the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and give us husn khuluq like Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had, and make our relationship with our wives stronger. The major cause, the biggest cause behind the fact that we are not good with our wives is we don't have, number one, husn khuluq. And I'll tell you one other thing. Big factor, nowadays especially. And that is, we don't keep our gaze low. Because when you look at another woman, then you start comparing. And when you start comparing, then you see faults in your wife. And when you see faults in your wife, then it's very difficult to treat her properly. She's like this, she's not like that. She's like this. Look how beautiful she was. And she did this and she did that. And then all these things are coming in his mind. Now he's not able to treat her the way he's supposed to. We should remember that our wife is chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us. Nobody can take her place. Nobody can take her place. And she is the greatest because she has been chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because of that, we should remember to always keep our gaze low. It helps destroy relationships. And know that our wife is very special because she's been chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No matter how pretty another woman is, she hasn't been chosen by Allah for us. She has been chosen by Allah for me. And that will increase our love for our wife too. So we should try as much as we can. Number one, husn khuluq. And number two, always keeping our gaze low as much as possible. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillah.